Welcome to Cheating Web Stories. We've got a thrilling story for you today, and we hope you love it, so sit tight and let's get into the story. Jerome Beckett was an architect and a very talented one at that. While most of his friends were unsure about which career path they would take during their college years, Jerome knew exactly what he wanted to do since his junior year in high school. He attended the University of Maryland to earn a Bachelor of Science in Architecture, but after graduating, he wasn't in a position to pursue a master's degree immediately because his family still needed to put his younger sister and brother through college. Instead, Jerome was able to secure a solid position as a draftsman at a well-known architectural firm in Northern Virginia, starting at the lower levels while doing more than just draftsman work. After all, no one starts off designing skyscrapers. But Jerome was comfortable in his position and quickly became proficient with the computer design software that was used. By saving his income wisely, he managed to save enough to fund his master's education. He was fortunate enough to gain acceptance into Clear.E University's MS program, thanks to his outstanding performance at work. His company was sad to see him go because Jerome's savings weren't enough to cover all his needs, and he still needed to continue earning while he studied. He landed a draftsman job with a local firm of civil engineers, which handled a lot of contract work for the city. In terms of his job, Jerome worked on a flexible schedule, with most of his classes still being held at night. He spent a lot of time in the cafeteria, as he often needed to work long hours on the computer for both his employer and his classes. He would find a quiet corner with his laptop and stay there until it was time to either head to class or go home. One evening during dinner at the cafeteria, he met Lucy, a waitress. Sometimes, especially at night, the place would be so empty that there were more staff members than customers. Jerome noticed Lucy on her first night working there, and even though she was dressed in her waitress uniform, wearing minimal makeup, and her hair styled in a somewhat unflattering way, he still found her quite attractive based on her facial features and figure. Eventually, they reached a point where they became very social with one another, and Lucy would often bring Jerome coffee without even being asked. Later, she would sometimes stop by and chat with him for a few minutes, always being mindful not to waste his time since she noticed he was working hard. Jerome found out that she was a single mom with a 1-year-old baby at home. County social services helped her with some income, but she still had to work 2 jobs to make ends meet. Jerome realized that the attraction between them was growing strong, so one night he asked her out for a Saturday evening dinner. She told him she would love to go out with him but didn't have any friends or family who could watch her baby, and the cost of hiring a babysitter was too high. Jerome wasn't going to let that stand in the way, so he offered to cover the cost of the babysitter. Lucy felt genuinely sorry and embarrassed that she had to rely on Jerome's generosity just to spend time with him, but for Jerome, it was more than worth it. He went straight to Lucy's small apartment after his Friday classes, where Lucy was getting ready for their dinner date. Her dinner dress confirmed Jerome's earlier assessment of her lovely face and almost sensual figure. The babysitter was a kind high school senior who had already arrived. Lucy, eager for Jerome to meet her baby, brought him into the living room to introduce him to her daughter. Jerome thought she was the most beautiful baby he had ever seen. Her name was Clara, and this marked the beginning of Jerome and Lucy's relationship. Over the next few months, Jerome fell in love with both Lucy and her baby. He didn't feel uncomfortable at all with the fact that Lucy was a mother, and Lucy grew to love Jerome in return, feeling very grateful that he accepted her for who she was. Lucy was eager to include her child as part of their relationship. She told Jerome that she had given birth to a child without being married. She explained that she had been in a long-term relationship with her high school boyfriend, and when they were both attending community college, she became pregnant. Her boyfriend wanted her to have an abortion, but she refused. Shortly after, he left her and moved to another state for college. Since then, she had been struggling with the expenses of raising a child and managing her living costs. Social services provided some financial assistance, and her family helped from time to time, though they were not wealthy either. To increase her income, she worked 2 jobs. After dating for a few months, they moved in together. When Jerome was close to finishing his master's program, he proposed to Lucy. Lucy was overjoyed because she had found a man who loved her and wanted to be a father to her child. Jerome also loved her child just as much as she did. Shortly after graduation, Jerome, Lucy, and Clara moved to Northern Virginia, where Jerome got a job with his former employer again. However, this time, due to his advanced education and experience, he was hired at a much higher level with a significantly better salary. Jerome and Lucy rented a 3-bedroom townhouse with an attached 2-car garage, which was more than enough for their small family. About a year after they settled into their home, Lucy became pregnant. They welcomed a son, whom they named Richard, but affectionately called Richie. Jerome was successful as an architect, but designing large buildings, shopping malls, and apartment complexes didn't fully satisfy him. Part of his dissatisfaction stemmed from the fact that he was still only designing a small portion of the projects, and he rarely got to see the results of his efforts, as many projects took years to complete, and some were canceled or put on hold. He told Lucy that his true passion was in designing homes. When Clara was 7 years old and Richie was 5, Jerome found a house for them to buy. From his perspective, it was perfect. Located on a dead-end street in an excellent neighborhood with one of the best school districts. While the house might have seemed ordinary to most people, it wasn't to Jerome. With a trained architect's eye, he saw it as the ideal home where they would raise their children and where he could run his business. The home was a 4-bedroom rambler with 3.5 bathrooms, a large living room, a spacious family room, and a big dining room. It also had a 2-car garage. But what really sold Jerome on the house was the full walkout basement, where he could set up his home-based architecture business. Although the basement was unfinished, Jerome could already envision how he would complete it to host clients, draft his designs, and create models as needed. The French doors in the walkout basement opened to a small, private landscaped patio. The asking price was $700,000, and Jerome immediately made an offer to purchase it at that amount. He knew it would cost at least another $100,000 to renovate the home and finish the basement to his specifications, but he still believed it was worth the price. Lucy thought it was ideal as well. The children loved the idea of having their own bedrooms. 12 years later, Jerome was running a highly successful home design business and enjoying a stellar reputation as an architect capable of designing everything from mansions to quads. He also held several patents. As Jerome continued developing home designs, he created a series of ultra-low-cost homes for people who couldn't normally afford a traditional house. He also designed fold-out homes for people in underdeveloped countries, giving them many of the amenities and security of a regular home. Some of his designs allowed for gradual expansion, adding new parts to the house without the need for expensive foundations or site work. A family could start with a modest 2-bedroom, 1-story house and gradually expand it to a large 4- or 5-bedroom home as the family and finances grew. When Richie started kindergarten, Lucy knew it was time for her to go back to work. She chose real estate because she thought that as a real estate agent, she could control her schedule, allowing her to stay home with the family when needed. At the same time, she could earn extra income, giving her a sense of contributing more to the household. Jerome agreed with her career choice and thought it was a great idea. Lucy enrolled in a challenging real estate agent training program, which was affordable. After a few weeks, Lucy passed her real estate board exam and state exam. She decided to join a small local real estate firm with a dozen or so offices. Lucy's charm and friendly personality made her a natural at working with the public. After a slow start and a few mistakes, she quickly found success as both a selling agent and a buying agent. Over time, Lucy grew to love working with buyers. She steadily built her reputation in the real estate business, and within a few years, she had become one of the top agents at her company, significantly contributing to the family's income. She applied for a new opportunity to become the managing broker of a new office. She had earned all the certifications and endorsements needed for her original license, and it was time to get her broker's license. Her company was so impressed with her that they asked her to manage their new real estate office. Soon, Lucy had 17 agents working under her. As Lucy's career progressed, it started to take up more of her time away from her family and Jerome. She would often leave early in the morning and spend most of the day outside the home. She also worked on weekends when she had open houses scheduled, and she arranged continuing education training for her agents on weekends and evenings so they would have weekdays free to meet clients. Since Jerome's business was based at home, he began taking on more household responsibilities. He would wake up early to make breakfast, pack lunches for Clara and Richie, and walk them to the bus stop. In the evenings, he helped them with their homework and attended their school events. If Jerome knew Lucy was going to be home late, he would also make dinner. He was a good cook and often tried new recipes, cooking with Clara. But over time, the closeness between Jerome and Lucy started to fade. Lucy would often come home exhausted, eat dinner, and head to bed early with a glass of wine. Jerome tried several times to rekindle their closeness, but his efforts didn't last long. This story begins on a spring morning when Jerome was driving home after dropping Lucy off at the airport, where she was flying out to attend her annual 3-day real estate conference. As Jerome turned onto his street, his eyes caught sight of a white SUV parked in front of his house. On his way home, Jerome noticed a woman sitting on the steps of his front porch. Instead of parking his car in the garage, he pulled over directly in the driveway so he could greet his visitor. As he stepped out of the car, he saw that the woman was standing on the porch, waiting for him to approach. From a distance, Jerome assessed the woman. She appeared to be between 40 and 45 years old. Her light brown hair was neatly tied atop her head. She had a pleasant and friendly face, and with a little makeup she would have looked even more attractive. The fine lines on her face indicated her age, but she still had a well-maintained figure, though her slate blue pants and loose white blouse did little to reveal her body's contours. As Jerome got closer, the woman asked, "Are you Jerome Beckett?" She extended her hand for a handshake. "Yes, I am," Jerome replied, shaking her hand. Before Jerome could ask anything else, the woman introduced herself. "My name is Kennedy Dumont." "Kennedy, how can I help you?" Jerome inquired. With a soft smile, Kennedy replied, "Please call me Kennedy, and I'll call you Jerome if that's okay. We didn't have an appointment, but it's really important that I talk to you." Jerome noticed how serious Kennedy seemed, with no trace of a smile. He invited her inside, and as he opened the door, Kennedy picked up a heavy bag and followed him in. Jerome led her to the family room and gestured for her to sit on the large sofa. He was about to settle into his favorite chair, but then he remembered his manners and asked, "Would you like something to drink?" Kennedy took a deep breath and said, "A glass of red wine would help if you have any." Jerome smiled and went to the kitchen. He returned with a bottle of Cabernet and 2 glasses. Kennedy took a long sip and, with a deep breath, said, "What I'm about to tell you is very personal and difficult. It may hurt you, but I have to say it." Jerome listened carefully as Kennedy continued. "I'm the owner of Dumont Furniture Rental and Staging Company. Our business primarily involves staging homes that are up for sale. Most of our revenue comes from real estate agents and companies. My husband, Hank, is our marketing representative, and he has direct contact with agents. Your wife's office is one of our biggest clients, and your wife knows my husband quite well." A sense of unease started to creep up in Jerome, but he stayed silent. Kennedy pressed on. "It pains me to say this, but your wife and my husband have been having an affair for the past 7 months. They meet at least once a week. Often, they meet in houses that are for sale, places that are empty." Jerome was stunned. He quickly took another sip of his wine before asking seriously, "Do you have any proof? Pictures, videos?" "Yes and no," Kennedy replied. "At first, I just had a gut feeling, but gradually I noticed changes in Hank's behavior. He would be out all day and I wouldn't be able to reach him. His phone would be off. That's when I started to suspect something was wrong. Jerome remained silent as Kennedy continued. Over time, it became clearer to me that something wasn't right. I'm heartbroken because I realized that what I feared was true. Kennedy took another sip of her wine, breathing deeply as she expressed her pain. Jerome, too, was finding the situation difficult and painful, but he maintained his composure. I was really anxious. I had lost weight, couldn't focus on my work, and my life felt completely out of control. So, I finally decided to figure it all out, and I hired a private investigation company. The company had to follow her for about a week. They told me they saw her entering a house that was for sale with another woman. They arrived in separate cars, and the woman's car had a real estate logo on the door. They would usually stay for around 2, sometimes 3 hours, and then leave separately. The private investigation company didn't find it hard to determine that the woman was your wife, Lucy Beckett. The same pattern had been repeated week after week. However, there was no actual picture or video of them being intimate. That's all there is for now. I'm sorry Jerome dropped all this on you so coldly. Honestly, I wish someone had approached me like this. At least then I wouldn't have had to go through months of doubt and uncertainty, wondering what was going on, what to say, or how to respond. Jerome was completely confused. He was about to tell Kennedy that he still didn't believe it, but their conversation was interrupted by a call on Kennedy's cell phone. "Excuse me," Kennedy said, raising his hand to signal that he needed to take the call. Jerome could only hear one side of the conversation. "How are the arrangements going?" Kennedy asked the person on the other side of the phone. "Are all the rooms covered with audio and video? Can we do a test soon? All right, I'll sign off on it." Kennedy hung up the phone and turned back to Jerome. "Can I sign into your internet server?" he asked, pulling a laptop out of his backpack and placing it on the coffee table. Jerome's internet password rolled off his tongue like a robot, still processing what was happening. Kennedy powered up the laptop. "You just got back from the airport, right?" He got the answer to his question right. "You took your wife to catch a flight for a regional real estate conference in Atlanta." "Yeah," Jerome said. "She goes every year. She's told me that she gets a lot of useful information on how to sell properties, attract buyers, and network with companies like Kennedy's real estate firm. Sometimes she buys new software for her office. I dropped my husband off at the airport about 2 hours ago. I'm sure he's on the same flight as your wife," Kennedy replied. "My husband goes to that same conference every year, too. He even gives a presentation on the benefits of staging for joint audiences. It's been super effective, and several clients have come into our real estate offices because of it." "You see, Jerome," Kennedy continued, "according to my investigators, your wife doesn't have a room reserved at the convention hotel, either under her name or her company's name. I think she intends to share my husband's room." Kennedy looked at him, noting that their plane should be landing soon. "I'm expecting a call from my husband when he gets to the hotel. Maybe your wife will call you too." "Yeah," Jerome replied. "She said she'd call when she lands, and then again after she checks into her room later in the day." Jerome felt a knot forming in the pit of his stomach, growing bigger and tighter with each passing moment. He ordered Kennedy, "Tell me what's going on. You must know everything. For some time, I've suspected that your wife and my husband were planning to spend intimate time together at the hotel," Kennedy admitted. "I wanted to catch them in the act on video. A few days ago, I rented a room in that hotel under my company's name. This morning, my investigators placed several video cameras and recording devices in the room. The cameras are connected to a server that's live streaming the events to my computer and recording everything on a similar setup in my lawyer's office." Jerome asked, "What's stopping others from seeing the footage?" "It's encrypted," Kennedy explained. "It requires a password to view, and only my lawyer and I know the password." Jerome's phone rang, the ringtone signaling that it was Lucy. "I just landed," Lucy said, her voice clear. "How was the flight?" Jerome asked. Not too bad. I treated myself and flew first class, had a nice lunch, and even managed to take a nap. Of course, the company will pay for all of it, just like they're covering the conference and hotel room, Lucy replied. You can write it off as a business expense on your taxes, Jerome said, trying to maintain a calm tone. That's right, honey, she said. Next year you should come with me, and we can turn it into a vacation. Atlanta's a great place for tourists and lovers. Without thinking, Jerome replied, We'll make a vacation out of it, even if you have to spend your days hobnobbing with your real estate friends. I'll call you from the hotel later tonight, Lucy said. Maybe a little early because there's a cocktail social scheduled for 7 p.m. in the convention hall. All right, babe, Jerome said as he signed off. I love you. Don't ever forget that. Then Jerome turned to Kennedy. I still can't believe she would do this to me, to our family. I didn't want to believe it. Kennedy nodded knowingly. All the little clues have been eating away at me like acid, she said. After all these months, I need to know for sure if it's true. Just then, Kennedy's phone rang again. She glanced at the caller ID and told Jerome, It's my investigator, Paul Drake. She answered the phone. I can see everything, she said as the investigator spoke, but Jerome only caught half the conversation. Yes, the picture is very clear. He firmly instructed Kennedy, Tell me everything. You must know all about this. For some time now, I've been suspecting that your wife and my husband plan to spend intimate time together at the hotel. I wanted to catch them red-handed. A few days ago, I booked a room at the hotel under my company's name, and this morning my investigators installed several hidden cameras and recording devices there. These cameras are connected to a server that's live streaming the footage to my computer, and everything is being recorded on a similar setup at my lawyer's office. Jerome asked, How are you making sure no one else can see the footage? Kennedy explained, It's all encrypted, and a password is required to view it. Only my lawyer and I have the password. Jerome's phone suddenly rang, and the ringtone told him it was Lucy. I just landed, Lucy said clearly as soon as she got off the flight. How was the flight? Jerome asked. Not too difficult. I treated myself and flew first class. Had a good lunch and even managed to take a nap. Of course, the company's covering all of it, just like they're covering the conference and the hotel room. Jerome replied, You can write it off as a business expense for your taxes. That's right, darling, Lucy responded. Next year you should come with me. We can turn it into a vacation. Atlanta is a fantastic place for tourists and couples. Without much thought, Jerome said, Yeah, we'll make a vacation out of it, even if you have to spend your days with your real estate friends. At night, I just want to see you in your red dress. Lucy replied, I'll call you from the hotel later this evening. Maybe a little early because there's a cocktail social scheduled for 7 p.m. All right, babe, Jerome signed off. I love you. Never forget that. Jerome turned to Kennedy and said, I still can't believe she would do this to me, to our family. Kennedy nodded knowingly. I've had my suspicions for months, too. All these little clues have been eating me up inside. Now I need to know for sure. Just then, Kennedy's phone rang. She looked at the caller ID and said, It's my investigator, Paul Drake. She answered the phone. I can see everything, but Jerome could only hear half of the conversation. Yes, the footage is very clear, Kennedy responded. Kennedy paced from one corner of the room to another, headphones in her ears, her focus fixed on Jerome's voice giving updates from the other end. All right, I can hear everything clearly. I'm moving through each room of the suite. Are you toggling between the cameras? I need to make sure every angle is covered. There was a mix of urgency and nervousness in Kennedy's voice. She knew this operation was crucial, and there was no room for error. Jerome responded calmly, I'm toggling between them. All cameras are live, and I can see every room clearly. Can you hear me all right? Kennedy adjusted the volume slightly. Yeah, you're coming through crystal clear now, like a bell. She fixed her headphones again and made another round of the room. Okay, I'll do one last test. Speaking now, 1, 2, 3. Test, 1, 2, 3. She paused for a moment before asking, "Is this working?" Jerome checked the monitors in front of him and replied, "Yes, everything's working perfectly. Audio and video are both coming through loud and clear." Kennedy nodded. "Great." She glanced in the direction of her investigator's voice and said, "Now we'll straighten out the room and completely clear it. When they arrive, we don't want anything obstructing their view. Everything has to be perfect." Jerome agreed. "Absolutely. And when they're on their way, I'll keep you updated on every detail." Kennedy raised her glass. "Thanks, Paul. I'll be waiting for your call." She glanced towards Jerome as she tapped her phone to speed dial her lawyer. The lawyer picked up on the first ring. "Are you online?" Kennedy asked directly. Her lawyer replied, "Yes, I'm here." "Is everything going smoothly?" "Yeah, everything's being recorded properly. You can see and hear everything," Kennedy said, settling into her seat. After ending the call, she took another sip from her glass, letting out a deep breath. Reaching for the bottle, she poured herself another drink and turned back towards Jerome. "You know, all of this is a bit stressful, but I'm confident we'll handle it," she said, the weariness in her voice barely masked. Jerome tried to ease her nerves. "You're doing great, but if you want, I can get you something else. Would you like another drink?" Kennedy gestured to her wine bottle. "No, I'm good with this. But maybe you could use something stronger." Jerome headed to the kitchen, calling back over his shoulder, "I'll grab something stronger for myself." He returned with a bottle of bourbon and a shot glass, looking over at Kennedy with a light smile. "You know, sometimes a stiff drink helps in these tense situations." Kennedy gave a faint smile in return. "Maybe. But right now, I just want to get through this." She took another sip of her wine, falling silent for a moment. After a brief pause, Kennedy decided to change the topic, to lighten the mood. "My investigators told me you have 2 kids, a daughter and a son. Is that right?" Jerome nodded, smiling slightly. "Yeah, my daughter Clara. She's in her 2nd year of college right now. She's very outgoing, into sports, art, all sorts of activities. But she still manages to come home on weekends when she can." Kennedy showed interest. "And your son?" "His name's Richard, but everyone calls him Richie. He's a bit more reserved but incredibly smart. He's in his final year of high school, planning to go to university next year," Jerome said, pride evident in his voice. Kennedy listened closely. "That's really great that both your kids are doing so well in their lives." Jerome poured a shot of bourbon, adding, "Yeah, I'm really proud of them. They're both hardworking and very thoughtful." Kennedy smiled. "It's always special spending time with your kids." Just then, Kennedy's phone buzzed with a message. She picked it up and saw it was an update from her lawyer about the situation. She glanced at Jerome. "Looks like they're going to be here soon. We need to get ready." Jerome put his glass aside and said, "Absolutely. I'll double-check all the cameras and audio. We can't afford to miss anything." Kennedy took one final look around the room, ensuring everything was in place. She took a deep breath and said, "All right, let's finish this." "She was born 2 years after Lucy and I got married," Jerome said. "Now she's a senior in high school and she's really into sports. In fact, she's away for a football game this weekend. She'll be back home on Saturday afternoon." Jerome paused for a moment, then added, "Maybe it's for the best that they're both away this weekend." An awkward silence filled the room, lingering until Jerome finally broke it with a question hanging in the air. "So, what's your story? Who's the guy having an affair with my wife?" Kennedy took a deep breath before beginning her story. "My parents started the Dumont Furniture Rental and Staging Company nearly 30 years ago. They ran it themselves until they retired. After they stepped back, I took over the business. When they passed away, the entire company fell into my hands. The business was doing all right, but as it grew, I realized I needed more help, especially in the marketing department. That's when I met Hank, Kennedy continued. That was about 7 years ago. He's 5 years younger than me, but we hit it off right away. Hank is incredibly charismatic and a natural-born salesman. After we got married, he took over all the marketing responsibilities. He handled advertising, sales, customer service, and even set up our company's website. He brought in a lot of new clients and really helped grow the business. Kennedy paused for a moment, took another deep breath, and then said, "Looking back now, I realize he probably met your wife around that time. His job kept him out a lot, especially visiting real estate offices that needed staging services." Kennedy's eyes seemed to grow heavier with the weight of her words, but she kept going. "I still don't understand why he became so infatuated with your wife, but this must be his longest affair." "Even though Lucy is 10 years older than my husband, she's still a very beautiful woman," Kennedy said quietly. "And just like my husband, she's a natural at sales. I guess they both recognized that charm in each other and somehow got drawn together. They're both very magnetic people." For a while, the two sat in an uncomfortable silence, Jerome staring at the floor while Kennedy offered a faint smile as she finished her story. Suddenly, the silence was interrupted by a message notification on Kennedy's phone. She glanced at the screen and said softly, "It's from the hotel." Jerome and Kennedy were now facing a reality far beyond what they had imagined. On Kennedy's computer screen, a photo was displayed. Her husband Hank and Jerome's wife Lucy standing at the hotel registration desk. They were holding hands, their faces lit up with smiles that made it clear how happy they were together. It was a scene that neither Jerome nor Kennedy wanted to see. And then, in the next image, they were heading toward the elevator, their closeness confirming what Jerome and Kennedy had been trying to ignore. Jerome stood up from his chair, grabbing the bottle of bourbon from the table beside him. He poured himself a glass, sitting back down on the sofa, his eyes glued to the screen, though his mind seemed elsewhere. He crossed his arms over his chest, as if bracing himself for the painful truth that was about to unfold. Kennedy, who had seemed composed until now, was breaking down from the inside. She knew she was about to confront the reality she had been trying to avoid for so long. The oppressive silence in the room was suddenly broken by the sound of a key card unlocking a door. The door swung open quickly, and Hank dropped their bags carelessly onto the floor. He hadn't even closed the door before he spun Lucy around and kissed her passionately. Kennedy's breath caught in her throat. Lucy's voice echoed in the room. "Not now, baby." But Hank didn't wait another minute. The intimacy between them grew, and everything happening on the screen was undeniable proof of their affair. Kennedy and Jerome watched the scene unfold, their world crumbling before their eyes. Kennedy, who had been holding it together, suddenly broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. "I love him so much. How could this happen?" she whispered, her voice cracking with every word. Jerome pulled her into his arms, holding her tight, as if trying to shield her from the unbearable pain. But tears were now streaming down his own face. Even as they were consumed by their emotions, they couldn't tear their eyes away from the screen. The lovers were now on the bed, and Lucy's voice could be heard clearly. "I needed this," she said, her voice tinged with exhaustion, but also satisfaction. "Give me a few minutes to rest, baby, and we can do this again." Hank responded, his tone relaxed and almost teasing. "All right, sleep tight, stud." Lucy giggled softly. "I need to call home," she said, as she sat on the edge of the bed, wearing nothing but the bedsheet wrapped around her. She picked up her phone and dialed a number. Within seconds, Jerome's phone started ringing. He was so shaken that he didn't know if he could answer it. His hands were trembling. Finally, he picked up the call, but he said nothing. He couldn't look away from Kennedy's computer screen, where everything was playing out in real time. "Hey, darling." Lucy's voice purred over the phone, completely calm, as if nothing unusual had happened. "We've all checked in. I'm going to grab a little rest before heading down to the social event. Just wanted to let you know that I love you." Jerome watched in horror as Hank sat behind Lucy on the bed, kissing her neck. The sight hit Jerome like a punch to the gut, but there was nothing he could do. His hand tightened around his phone, and for a moment, he thought he might drop it. When they passed away, the entire company fell into my hands. The business was doing all right, but as it grew, I realized I needed more help, especially in the marketing department. "That's when I met Hank," Kennedy continued. "That was about 7 years ago. He's 5 years younger than me, but we hit it off right away. Hank is incredibly charismatic and a natural-born salesman. After we got married, he took over all the marketing responsibilities. He handled advertising, sales, customer service, and even set up our company's website. He brought in a lot of new clients and really helped grow the business." Kennedy paused for a moment, took another deep breath, and then said, "Looking back now, I realize he probably met your wife around that time. His job kept him out a lot, especially visiting real estate offices that needed staging services." Kennedy's eyes seemed to grow heavier with the weight of her words, but she kept going. "I still don't understand why he became so infatuated with your wife, but this must be his longest affair. Even though Lucy is 10 years older than my husband, she's still a very beautiful woman," Kennedy said quietly. "And just like my husband, she's a natural at sales. I guess they both recognized that charm in each other and somehow got drawn together. They're both very magnetic people." For a while, the two sat in an uncomfortable silence, Jerome staring at the floor, while Kennedy offered a faint smile as she finished her story. Suddenly, the silence was interrupted by a message notification on Kennedy's phone. She glanced at the screen and said softly, "It's from the hotel." Jerome and Kennedy were now facing a reality far beyond what they had imagined. On Kennedy's computer screen, a photo was displayed. Her husband Hank and Jerome's wife Lucy standing at the hotel registration desk. They were holding hands, their faces lit up with smiles that made it clear how happy they were together. It was a scene that neither Jerome nor Kennedy wanted to see. And then, in the next image, they were heading toward the elevator, their closeness confirming what Jerome and Kennedy had been trying to ignore. Jerome stood up from his chair, grabbing the bottle of bourbon from the table beside him. He poured himself a glass, sitting back down on the sofa, his eyes glued to the screen, though his mind seemed elsewhere. He crossed his arms over his chest, as if bracing himself for the painful truth that was about to unfold. Kennedy, who had seemed composed until now, was breaking down from the inside. She knew she was about to confront the reality she had been trying to avoid for so long. The oppressive silence in the room was suddenly broken by the sound of a key card unlocking a door. The door swung open quickly, and Hank dropped their bags carelessly onto the floor. He hadn't even closed the door before he spun Lucy around and kissed her passionately. Kennedy's breath caught in her throat. Lucy's voice echoed in the room. "Not now, baby." But Hank didn't wait another minute. The intimacy between them grew, and everything happening on the screen was undeniable proof of their affair. Kennedy and Jerome watched the scene unfold, their world crumbling before their eyes. Kennedy, who had been holding it together, suddenly broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. "I love him so much. How could this happen?" she whispered, her voice cracking with every word. Jerome pulled her into his arms, holding her tight, as if trying to shield her from the unbearable pain. But tears were now streaming down his own face. Even as they were consumed by their emotions, they couldn't tear their eyes away from the screen. The lovers were now on the bed, and Lucy's voice could be heard clearly. "I needed this," she said, her voice tinged with exhaustion, but also satisfaction. "Give me a few minutes to rest, baby, and we can do this again." Hank responded, his tone relaxed and almost teasing. "All right, sleep tight, stud." Lucy giggled softly. "I need to call home," she said as she sat on the edge of the bed, wearing nothing but the bed sheet wrapped around her. She picked up her phone and dialed a number. Within seconds, Jerome's phone started ringing. He was so shaken that he didn't know if he could answer it. His hands were trembling. Finally, he picked up the call, but he said nothing. He couldn't look away from Kennedy's computer screen, where everything was playing out in real time. "Hey, darling," Lucy's voice purred over the phone, completely calm, as if nothing unusual had happened. "We've all checked in. I'm going to grab a little rest before heading down to the social event. Just wanted to let you know that I love you." Jerome watched in horror as Hank sat behind Lucy on the bed, kissing her neck. The sight hit Jerome like a punch to the gut, but there was nothing he could do. His hand tightened around his phone, and for a moment he thought he might drop it, but he steadied himself, quietly ending the call without saying a word. Kennedy looked at him, her eyes filled with tears. "What did we do wrong?" she asked in a trembling voice, as if she desperately wanted an answer but feared there wouldn't be one. "I've always loved him, always supported him. So why this?" Jerome took a deep breath. "I don't know. Maybe we'll never know," he said, his voice hollow. He too was drowning in the same sea of pain, but he didn't have the words to make sense of it. He just held Kennedy tighter, both of them clinging to the shattered pieces of their lives, knowing they couldn't put them back together again. Time seemed to stand still. What they were watching on the screen was no longer just a video. It was now a part of their reality, a part of their lives that they would never be able to erase. Jerome picked up his glass of bourbon again, but this time he didn't drink it. He placed it back on the table, closing his eyes as if he could make it all go away. "What now?" he asked aloud, though he wasn't expecting an answer. Kennedy's voice was shaky as she replied, "How do we live with this?" She wiped her eyes, her hands trembling. "I can't leave him, but I can't watch him betray me like this either." Jerome looked at her, a faint glimmer of understanding in his eyes. "Maybe we need time. Maybe things will become clearer." Kennedy heard his words, but she didn't believe them. "Time? Do you really think time will make this pain go away?" she whispered, her voice laced with hopelessness. "I don't think time can heal this wound." Jerome said nothing. He just nodded slightly, gazing into her tear-filled eyes. In that moment, they both understood each other's pain, but neither of them knew how this pain would end. The minutes dragged on, the weight of the room suffocating them both. There was no plan, no way forward. They were simply facing the truth they never wanted to see. Kennedy wiped her eyes, her voice small but determined. "We have to do something." "Yeah," Jerome agreed quietly. "We have to do something." But both of them knew that what needed to be done remained a mystery. Whatever had happened, it had changed their world forever. Jerome couldn't take it anymore. He took a deep breath and muttered, "See you Sunday afternoon," before abruptly hanging up the phone. On the screen, he saw Lucy looking momentarily confused by the sudden end to their call, but she quickly dismissed it. "You ready for another round?" Hank asked with a teasing grin. "Need a little more excitement?" Lucy smirked, nodding as she replied, "Yeah, it always helps." Hank chuckled and said, "All right, let's get back to it." Jerome's heart sank even deeper. He knew he couldn't watch anymore, and he doubted Kennedy could either. Both of them had been silently crying, tears streaming down their faces. The weight of betrayal was almost unbearable. Trying to change the mood and get their minds off the painful reality unfolding on the screen, Jerome spoke up. "Hey, want to see my architecture office downstairs?" His voice was low, shaky, but he was desperately grasping for anything to divert their attention from what was happening. Kennedy quickly nodded, eager to focus on something else. Both of them stood up. Jerome grabbed his bourbon flask, and Kennedy followed with her wine glass in hand. They headed down to the basement, leaving the heartache of the upstairs behind for a moment. Once they entered Jerome's office, he tried to lighten the mood by giving her a tour. He showed Kennedy his CAD system, explaining how he used it for designing houses. He pointed to his modeling desk where he worked on building miniature versions of his projects, and then to the client lounge area, which he had designed himself to make his clients feel comfortable. The walls were lined with framed blueprints and sketches of homes Jerome had designed over the years. Kennedy's eyes scanned the drawings, and for the first time in hours, there was a brief flicker of admiration in her eyes. She was impressed by Jerome's talent and dedication, and for a moment, component placement. It provided a small distraction from the heavy emotions they were both carrying. After spending a while in the office, they stepped out into the small patio that connected to the basement. The cool evening breeze was refreshing, a brief respite from the suffocating atmosphere upstairs. They stood in silence for a moment, listening to the soft rustling of leaves in the wind. Eventually, the conversation turned to what they both knew was coming: divorce. Kennedy broke the silence, her voice barely above a whisper but filled with resolve. There's no coming back from this. We can't just ignore what's happening. Jerome nodded in agreement. Yeah, I think you're right, he murmured, his eyes focused on the horizon as his mind raced. The idea of separating from Lucy, even after everything, was still difficult to process. As they talked, Jerome voiced his concerns about Kennedy's situation. I'm just not sure you're financially in a good position for this right now, he said gently, looking at her with genuine concern. He knew she owned her company outright, but Hank had played a major role in the business's success over the past few years. He'd brought in new clients and significantly boosted their growth, particularly with his marketing expertise. I know Hank's a jerk for what he's done, but you have to admit, he's been a big part of your company's growth, Jerome said cautiously, not wanting to sound like he was defending Hank, but also worried about Kennedy making a rash decision that could hurt her financially. Kennedy, her eyes still red from crying, nodded slowly. You're right. Hank's been important to the business, she admitted, her voice wavering. But that doesn't change what he's done. I can't stay with him just because of the company. I'll figure it out. I have to. Jerome could hear the determination in her voice, but he also knew the road ahead would be tough. He, too, was struggling with the idea of ending his marriage, wondering how life would move forward without Lucy. But despite the pain, he knew deep down that their marriages were beyond repair. For the next couple of hours, Jerome and Kennedy busied themselves with small tasks, anything to keep their minds off the events unfolding at the hotel. They talked about work, shared memories, and discussed anything that didn't involve their cheating spouses, desperate for a brief escape from the heartbreak. But as the night wore on, the reality they were trying to avoid slowly crept back. Around 10:30, sounds began emanating from the computer once again, signaling that something new was happening in the hotel room. Jerome and Kennedy exchanged uneasy glances before making their way back upstairs, dreading what they might see. They sat back down in front of the screen, bracing themselves for the worst. What they saw only made their stomachs churn. Hank and Lucy had returned to the hotel room. They were sitting together on the sofa, drinks in hand, their bodies pressed closely against each other. Lucy's hand rested on Hank's thigh as they leaned into one another, clearly enjoying their intimate moment. Jerome clenched his fists, his anger rising, but he remained silent, unable to tear his eyes away from the screen. Hank suddenly glanced at Lucy and said, I should probably give Kennedy a call. Jerome and Kennedy looked at each other, both stunned by the audacity of what they were witnessing. The fact that Hank was casually considering calling Kennedy while sitting so intimately with Lucy was almost too much to handle. Hello, baby. A warm, familiar tone sets the mood for the conversation. Hi, darling, comes the response. I just checked in. The room is amazing. It's actually a suite. It's got a lounge area, a bar, a microwave, and even a fridge. Thank you so much. You're welcome, sweetheart, Hank replies with a soft smile. I figured you could use the extra space, especially while you're working to impress clients with our company's capabilities. It's all part of the marketing. As Hank keeps talking on the phone, Lucy is already getting comfortable on the couch, ready to get closer to her lover. Hank, however, is slowly losing focus on the call. The exhaustion in his voice is starting to show. Baby, I'm really tired. I'll talk to you tomorrow. And yeah, I love you as much as I always do, he wraps up the conversation. Kennedy, watching everything, clenches her teeth in anger. She can see how Hank's attention is drifting from his phone to Lucy. Jerome and Kennedy both keep staring at their screens, watching their wives. Lucy turns to Hank and quietly asks, "How long have you been doing this with your wife?" Hank answers, "Since we got married." I love women. They're like flowers, just waiting to be picked. Married women are the most interesting because they don't want anything permanent, and they always tell me they still love their husbands. Lucy pauses for a moment and then replies, "I love my husband. He got me and my family out of poverty. We have an amazing son, and my husband made sure we saved enough to send our kids to college. He sent me to real estate school. We have a beautiful home, and we live a great life with lots of good friends." Listening, Hank asks, "Then why all this?" Lucy, with a quiet voice, replies, "A while back, I realized love and attraction can often be sold. When I first became a real estate agent, a wealthy buyer made me an offer. He said if I slept with him, he'd buy the house at the listed price. He was good-looking and very charming." Lucy's words continue, but the mood in the room gets heavier. Jerome and Kennedy, still watching, are heartbroken. They now realize their world has changed forever. "Hi there," came the response. "I just checked into the hotel. This room is amazing. It's practically a suite. There's a lounge area, a mini bar, and even a little kitchen. I can't thank you enough." "You're welcome, hon," replied Eric with a gentle laugh. "I figured you'd appreciate the extra space, especially while you're meeting clients. It's part of making a strong impression, after all." While Eric was talking, Melissa made herself comfortable on the couch, settling in as her thoughts began drifting toward her partner. However, Eric's voice had started to sound distant, as though his focus was slipping away. "Sweetheart, I'm really exhausted," Eric said, his tone weary. "Let's talk tomorrow. I love you, always." As the call ended, Sandra, who had been observing quietly from the next room, clenched her fists in frustration. She had watched how Eric's attention shifted away from his phone and toward someone else, someone he clearly adored. Her heart sank further as she recalled all the moments she'd tried to make their relationship work. Without warning, Melissa turned to Eric and asked softly, "How long have you been this way with your wife?" Eric paused before replying, "Since the early days of our marriage." "I enjoy the thrill of it. Married women, they don't expect anything long-term. It's exciting in a different way, but they still claim to love their husbands." Melissa sighed and responded, "I love my husband too. He's always been there for me, through thick and thin. We've built a good life together, raised a wonderful son, and he's made sure we're financially secure. We even have a beautiful house because of him." Eric listened closely before asking, "So why are you here with me?" After a moment, Melissa whispered, "A while back I realized something. Love and attraction can sometimes feel transactional. When I first started in real estate, a wealthy client offered me a deal. He told me that if I slept with him, he'd buy a house at the full asking price. He was charming, and I gave in." Her voice trembled slightly as she continued, "After that, I told myself that if I had to use attraction to close deals, I'd only do it rarely, maybe once a year. But I did what I had to for the sale. My husband, Lucas, was thrilled for me and credited my personality for my success. He was partially right, but you're the first man I've kept a steady connection with. I don't expect this to last forever. Eventually, we'll get tired of each other. Until then, We'll enjoy what we have." With a deep breath, Melissa stood up and said, "I need to head home before I get too drunk to drive." Meanwhile, Sandra had been quietly jotting down notes in a notepad. She turned toward her laptop, scribbled down a website address and password, and closed the lid. "If you want to see how this all plays out," she said, holding out the note, "here's the site." She then packed away her laptop and, before leaving the room, added, "I'll bring a DVD of everything on Sunday. My lawyer is recording this for evidence. Let me know your intentions. I plan to confront Lucas myself." As Sandra walked out, Eric followed her to the door. She gave him a long, tight hug, the kind that comes with the weight of decisions made and futures uncertain. After a moment, she left without another word. Eric returned to his home later that evening, heading straight to his office. He powered on his laptop, connected to the external monitor and printer, and took a deep breath. Once it was set up, he opened the website and entered the password Sandra had given him. The first image that appeared wasn't of Sandra, but of a dimly lit hotel room showing a bed. Eric clicked through a few times, the scene growing clearer. His wife, Melissa, in bed with another man. For the first time, Eric was forced to confront his feelings. The betrayal was palpable. His marriage with Melissa had always been something he cherished. He never imagined she could do this to him, and yet here was the proof. As he watched the footage, he realized this was about more than just physical attraction. Melissa had admitted she'd been using her charm to close deals in the past, and that was something Eric couldn't look past. With a heavy heart, he knew what had to be done. Divorce was the only answer. Their love life had grown comfortable, but it had lost the passion it once had in the early years of their marriage. And now, knowing the truth, there was no going back. On Sunday afternoon, a taxi pulled up in front of Mia's house. Mia noticed her daughter, Sarah, sitting on the porch steps. "Can you help me with my luggage, please?" Mia asked Sarah. The taxi driver had already placed the luggage on the curb, but Sarah remained seated on the porch steps, motionless. Mia slowly dragged her suitcase, one hand holding a briefcase and a carry-on hanging from her shoulder. Finally, when she reached the concrete path, she set the heavy luggage down with frustration. "You could have helped me, you know," she said angrily to Sarah. Sarah didn't respond, her eyes vacant and cold. "What are you doing home? I thought you were at school," Mia asked, her voice edged with anger. Sarah replied in a calm tone, "I came home Saturday morning. When I found out you were leaving for your conference, I wanted to spend some time with Dad." "And where is your father?" Mia asked, surprised. "He knew what flight I was on. I waited for him for over an hour, called him 10 times, and got no answer. Every call went to voicemail. What on earth was more important than picking me up?" Without emotion, Sarah said, "Dad's at the park by the lake with Richie." They were having a few beers and relaxing. Mia's face flushed with anger. "They're at the park drinking beer and he left me at the airport? When he gets home, I'm going to teach him a lesson." Mia hurried up the steps to the front door but found it locked. She fumbled in her purse for her keys and tried to unlock the door, but the key wouldn't fit. Stunned, Mia said, "What's going on?" "Why aren't my keys working?" Sarah responded in a cold voice. "Mom, Dad changed the locks yesterday." "He changed the locks? They worked fine when I left," Mia said, confused. Mia's eyes then drifted to the corner of the porch. There, 7 or 8 large black garbage bags were piled up. She looked back at Sarah, a mix of anger and disbelief on her face. "Why are those bags here?" Mia asked. Taking a deep breath, Sarah replied, "Mom, that's your stuff. Dad's made a decision." It was Sunday afternoon, and the weather was slightly chilly. Lucy got out of the taxi in front of her house, pulling out her luggage. She noticed her daughter, Clara, sitting quietly on the porch steps, as if lost in deep thought. It seemed strange to Lucy because Clara usually greeted her with a smile, but today there was no warmth in her eyes. Clara, can you help me with the luggage? It needs to be taken inside, Lucy said with a soft smile. But Clara didn't even look at her, keeping her gaze fixed on the ground as if she hadn't heard a word. Lucy found it a bit odd, but brushed it off, thinking maybe her daughter was tired or upset about something. Slowly, Lucy began dragging her suitcase toward the porch. As she moved forward, her eyes landed on a few black garbage bags and 2 large cardboard boxes piled up in one corner of the porch. There were more cardboard boxes placed on the patio table and 2 large suitcases standing near the railing. Seeing all this, Lucy's mind started to race. "What's all this stuff doing here?" Lucy asked, a slight nervousness creeping into her voice. She walked straight over to Clara, who was still sitting on the steps, not responding at all. Clara finally looked up, her eyes showing no emotion. "It's all your stuff, Mom," she said in a cold voice. "All your clothes are in those trash bags. Your shoes, everything from your dresser, your makeup is in one of the cardboard boxes, and your jewelry is in another. The 3 of us spent half of Saturday gathering all of it. I personally packed the suitcases." Lucy couldn't make sense of what was happening. Her breathing quickened, and a knot formed in her stomach. She stammered. "Why? Why did you do this?" "Dad knows all about your affair," Clara replied, her voice steady, without hesitation. "We all know now." Lucy's legs felt weak, and she struggled to keep her balance. "No, that can't be true. I was so careful," she muttered, as if trying to convince herself that this couldn't be happening. Clara gave her a stern look. "Dad never suspected anything, but your lover, Hank Wilson, wasn't as careful. Kennedy started to suspect him, and she hired a private investigator. They found out everything." "This can't be possible. I was in Atlanta, and he was here," Lucy said in a panicked voice, still refusing to believe the truth. "Kennedy had cameras installed in the hotel suite where you were staying. They recorded everything, audio, video. Dad found out about everything on Friday night," Clara informed her. Lucy was now completely broken. She collapsed onto the porch steps, clutching her head in her hands. Tears began to stream down her face. Her world, as she knew it, was crumbling. In a shaky voice, she asked, "What am I going to do now?" Clara's tone grew firmer. "Dad rented a suite for you. That's where you'll be staying. The rent's already paid for 3 months. Lucy, panicked, asked, "But how can I leave here? This is my home." "It's not your home anymore, Mom," Clara said coldly. "You lost this house the moment you betrayed Dad. He packed your things, and he's filing for divorce. You're not spending another day in this house." "No! It was a mistake!" Lucy cried out, sobbing. "I love Jerome. He's my life. I can't live without him." "You'll have to leave," Clara said harshly. "Dad doesn't want anything to do with you anymore, and neither do Richie or I. Only after you're gone will we have peace in this house." Lucy tried to pull herself together and slowly stood up from the steps. She looked at Clara, desperation in her eyes. "What I did was wrong. But I never wanted to hurt Jerome." Clara's face filled with anger. "Do you have any idea how much pain you've caused Dad? He gave you everything. He provided us a secure life, sent us to the best schools, gave us all the comforts we could ever want. And what did you do in return?" Lucy, her voice barely above a whisper, said, "I did it because I felt like I wasn't contributing to the family. I thought that if I earned money too, Jerome would be happier with me. But everything spiraled out of control." "You think money is everything? Love doesn't have a price, Mom." Clara's voice was now filled with frustration. "Your affair destroyed Dad. He'll still live in this house, but nothing will ever be the same for him." "I'm sorry," Lucy said softly, tears now rolling down her face. "Sorry isn't enough, Mom," Clara said. "You need to leave. Dad's already made all the arrangements. You won't spend another day in this house." Lucy looked at Clara one last time, her eyes filled with deep sorrow and desperation. Slowly, she walked over to her belongings, grabbed her suitcases, and without saying another word, started walking toward her car. She could feel her entire world slipping away behind her. As she reached the driveway, she turned to look back at the house, but it no longer felt like home. It was now just a distant memory of a life she had lost. Your father made arrangements for a suite at the Hilton Extended Living Facility, which isn't too far from your office. He's already paid for your first 3 months of rent. By the way, Kennedy did the same for her husband, except she only paid for 1 month. Maybe the two of you can get together tonight, compare notes, and rekindle whatever love you have left. And once that fool Hank's leash runs out, maybe he'll come stay with you, since there's no chance he'll get a job that can provide better housing. "I'm not leaving my home," Lucy cried. "I love Jerome. He's my life. I can't live without him." Clara responded sternly. "Mom, you have to leave." "Nobody wants you here. Not Dad, not Richie, and not me. Besides, you need to know that Dad is meeting with a lawyer on Monday. He's filing for divorce." "No, no, no," Lucy screamed. Clara, her voice cold and unfeeling, replied, "Mom, Dad is keeping the house. After all, it's his. It's where he runs his business. He's going to live here because Richie and I will be staying here with him. Richie may still be young, but he's old enough to decide which parent he wants to stay with. So of course he's staying with Dad." Clara paused and looked at Lucy, but there was no sympathy in her eyes. "You won't be getting any child support or alimony because you make good money selling real estate. Also, Dad, who's been fully funding your IRA, will let you keep that, but he won't be contributing any more to it. From now on, you'll be directly responsible for paying for your car, auto insurance, maintenance, and property taxes." Lucy, still trying to make sense of the situation, looked at Clara and asked, "How can you be so heartless? Your father has told me many times how much he loved me when we first met. He even said he'd always love me. He said that if we had more kids after we got married, especially daughters, he wouldn't love me any less." Clara sighed deeply and replied, "Mom, I'm Daddy's girl. He's taken care of you and me for 20 years. He gave us a beautiful home, took us on amazing vacations, and he's putting Richie and me through college. But once I found out what you did to my father, all the love I had for you died." Lucy lowered her head and muttered, "I know I made a mistake, but I got caught up in the pressure early on. A charming man made me a big offer. He said he'd buy an expensive house at full price without negotiating if I slept with him. I needed to show Jerome that I could be a successful real estate agent and contribute to the household finances." Clara, now visibly angry, said, "So first you sold yourself to make a deal, and then you became a cheater with that fool Hank Wilson." With regret in her voice, Lucy replied, "I thought I'd never get caught. I didn't want to hurt your father. That's why I made a promise to myself that I would love him like I always had. I never thought he'd find out. Your bad luck, Mom, was that Dad never suspected anything. But unfortunately, Hank wasn't as careful. Kennedy started getting suspicious, so she hired a private investigator and everything came out. The sting operation worked, and they found out exactly what you were doing," Clara said. Lucy, trembling, pleaded, "Please, baby, don't send me away. This is my home. Jerome needs me." Clara responded firmly, "I don't think so, Mom. Dad has always been the one taking care of us. He makes breakfast for Richie and me every morning, packs our school lunches, and even takes our clothes to the dry cleaners. He works from home, so he always makes time for us. And whenever you said you'd be home late, he'd even make dinner." Lucy, speaking softly, said, "But your father needs companionship and love. He needs me." Clara answered, "Dad doesn't need you anymore, Mom. He's no longer interested in you. I'll be staying here from now on and driving to college. Richie will be staying too. We'll take care of Dad." Lucy, still in disbelief, said, "But Dad loved me." Clara, her voice cold and detached, said, "Dad has moved on, Mom. And besides, he's a good-looking man. We convinced him to shave his beard, and we're signing him up for the gym so he can lose some weight, and I'll be cooking healthy meals for him. Clara continued, Richie and I are also getting him a new wardrobe. Suits, sportswear, casual clothes, shoes, everything. We're going to take him out more. We'll take him to theater events and sports games. Dad's not going to be alone anymore. Lucy, now sobbing, said, Please, isn't there anything I can do? Clara responded calmly, It's too late now, Mom. There's nothing left for you here. Maybe over time, Richie and I will be able to forgive you because you're our mother. But Dad is different. He's angry, and I'm afraid he might do something to you and Hank, so you should be careful.